Okay, moving on to the next topic. I wrote an article this week in the local black newspaper, the County News, titled "Where Do Americans Really Stand on the War in Ukraine?" And the article was partially driven by this survey that was conducted by the Institute for Global Affairs, which was published in June. It's titled "The New Atlanticism." They're referring to the Atlantic, right? Obviously, really, they should say the North Atlantic, but that's okay. And according to this report, now this is coming from a Ben Norton at a geopolitical economy. He captured this graph, this label, this image from the report, and it said that 94% of the people in the United States and 88% of the people in the three European countries that were surveyed, which were the United Kingdom, France, and Germany, support a negotiated settlement to the war in Ukraine. And so that just started me to thinking, I mean, if that number of people actually do support a negotiated settlement, then there's a huge disconnect because I don't see the activism, I don't see politicians under pressure. So I'm going to go through the what I wrote in the article. The Institute for Global Affairs published a survey in June titled "The New Atlanticism." The survey sought the perspectives of 3,360 people in the United States, United Kingdom, Germany, and France on the issues of national security, geopolitical challenges, and democratic principles. The IGA is viewed by some analysts to be a pro-NATO, anti-Russia consulting firm. Survey participants were allowed to choose 2 yes/no answers to 6 questions, which pushed the totals beyond 100%. So I think the reason why Ben Norton said that he wanted to make people understand that the totals from the survey, are actually coming from an organization that is pro NATO and anti Russia. So that gives it, somewhat more credibility. Per the survey, 94% of the people in the United States and 88% in the three European countries want a negotiated settlement to the end of the war in Ukraine. Just 17% of Americans and Western Europeans said that the Ukraine war must continue in order to weaken Russia. Now, if you remember from the beginning of the war, the leader of the tribes of the North Atlantic, the leader of the titular head of the American Empire, New Jim Crow, Joseph Robinette Biden, genocide Biden Jr., stated from the very beginning that the objective was to remove Vladimir Putin from power and to weaken Russia as a country. So only 17% of the people they surveyed agree with that. Per the executive summary of the survey, Americans and Western Europeans want their countries to avoid escalation and prevent further Ukrainian suffering significantly more than they want to restore Ukraine's borders or to deter autocratic countries. The European survey were much more concerned than Americans about a spillover into a regional war. Well, of course, where have the last 2 world wars been fought? In Europe, okay? So they understand the potential for spillover is much greater there, whereas the United States, has the protection of 2 oceans, although these nuclear submarines, each submarine can deliver the equivalent of about 5,000 Hiroshimas, doesn't provide a whole lot of protection. Clearly, there's a disconnect between the Americans interviewed for the IGA survey and the actions of their political representatives who have voted to provide more than 174 billion US taxpayer dollars for the war in Ukraine. And there's no political pressure being applied to America's political leaders to negotiate an end to this war. So that's why I question the numbers. and maybe these were just casual people that they surveyed. They have an opinion, but that's all they have is an opinion. If anything, the war in Ukraine is drawing the U.S. closer to direct conflict with Russia. In May, the Biden administration authorized Ukraine to use U.S. weapons to launch attacks inside Russian territory. Okay, so the Biden administration, who, in my opinion, are a group of political morons, being led, being pulled along, like a dog on a chain by the military-industrial complex, number one, and by the Zionist lobbies, number two. Just being drugged into something that has absolutely nothing to do with the national security of the United States. Okay? Nothing to do with the national security of the United States. On June 23rd, this is the result of Biden's authorization, authorizing Ukraine to use weapons to launch attacks inside Russian territory. On June 23rd, Ukraine fired 5 U.S.-supplied ATACMS tactical missiles equipped with cluster warheads at Russian positions in Crimea. Per media reports, Russian air defenses intercepted 4 of the missiles. The detonation of the 5th missile's fragmentation warhead in the air resulted in numerous civilian casualties in Sevastopol. Okay, part of the things that are discussed in terms of this war was that Russia re-annexed Crimea in 2014. Okay, the Crimean Peninsula, and we have a map which we'll put up shortly, was part of the Russian Empire for over 200 years until Nikita Khrushchev, gave it to Ukraine, which was then part of the Soviet Union, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics in 1954. So historically, Crimea has been part of Ukraine, at least for 200 years. Prior to that, of course, the British Empire attempted to conquer it. People can read about the Crimean War in the 1850s, for example. Okay. According to the Russian Ministry of Health, 124 people were injured, including 27 children, and 3 people were killed. These numbers may have gone up. I know Scott Ritter was saying today on Judge Napolitano's show that 5 were killed, including 2 children. The Russian Ministry of Defense said Washington is primarily responsible for the deliberate missile strike on Sevastopol civilians. Such actions will not remain unanswered. I doubt that a Sunday afternoon attack on a beach was deliberate, but the other points being made by the Russian Ministry of Defense are well taken. Also, Lavrov, the Russian the equivalent of the Secretary of State, also spoke about this. Now, what they are saying is this: the technology that's required to fire these ATACMS requires extensive training that, according to experts like Scott Ritter and Douglas McGregor and Matthew Ho and Ray McGovern and others, the Ukrainians have not had the level of training required. Plus, they have to have satellite intelligence that identifies the target so that they can dial them in. So even though Ukrainians on the ground somewhere may have actually pushed the button or pulled the trigger, everything that set this up was done by Americans. So this was essentially an American attack on Russia, territory that's now part of Russia, was historically part of Russia, et cetera, okay? The Sevastopol incident prompted U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin to call his Russian counterpart. It was the first conversation between U.S. and Russian military leaders since March of 2023. They aren't even talking to one another. So I questioned, I said, how can this potential nuclear conflict be averted if the participants are not even talking to one another? Do the American people really understand just how dangerous this situation is? This is the point we want to make. We want to go on record here at African Liberation Media of warning the American public. You know, you might be grilling out, you know, for the U.S. birthday on July the 4th. You may be going about your life as if nothing is going on. And this is very serious. This is very serious. What is being done in the name of the American people by these political morons in the Biden administration and the U.S. Congress, right? You know, should be grounds for the removal of the entire bunch of them. A lesson from the past. In 2014, Columbia University professor Jeffrey Sachs wrote an article titled "John F. Kennedy, We All Breathe the Same Air." So this is from Dr. Sachs's article, right? He's a severe critic of the U.S. foreign policy. JFK's greatness began in the famous 13 days of the Cuban Missile Crisis. While demanding the removal of the Soviet missiles, he bought time through a naval quarantine of Soviet ships to Cuba and kept open communication channels with Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev. He kept open while he was doing what he was doing as U.S. president, as the leader of the American empire. And it's not that we are fans of John F. Kennedy, but we give him credit where credit is due for what some of the things that he did. But we understand his fundamental role as president was to maintain the American empire. So he said he kept open the channels. He repeatedly imagined himself in Khrushchev's position in order to assess his motivations and to induce him to withdraw the missiles without humiliating the Soviet Union. One crucial part of that strategy was Kennedy's secret commitment to Khrushchev that the U.S. would remove its Jupiter missiles from Turkey. So what had happened was that the United States had installed some missiles in Turkey that could, you know, hit the Soviet Union, you know, within a matter of within a short period of time. And so when those missiles were installed in Turkey, the Russians looked to install missiles in Cuba. I mean, you got missiles on our border with you, virtually on our border. I mean, Turkey is just across the Black Sea. You know, it was on that map that we showed earlier. The United States had missiles, you know, close to Turkey. So the Soviets put missiles, you know, in Cuba. And so this became what was known as the Cuban Missile Crisis. It was as, you know, a young person growing up, you know, 10, 12 years old. I mean, this was something that was just right in our frontal lobes all day, all night, because we were very concerned about the possibility of a nuclear war between these two nuclear armed countries. Kennedy would say 8 months later in the peace speech, this was a speech he gave, I think, at American University in June of 1963, right? About what, 5 months, 6 months before he was killed. And above all, while defending our own vital interests, nuclear powers must avert those confrontations which bring an adversary to a choice of either a humiliating retreat or a nuclear war. That's a profound statement. To adopt that kind of course in the nuclear age would be evidence of only the bankruptcy of our policy or of a collective death wish. Collective death wish for the world. So let us not be blind to our differences, but let us also direct attention to our common interests and the means by which those differences can be resolved. And if we cannot end our differences, at least we can help make the world safe for diversity. For in the final analysis, Our basic common link is that we all inhabit this small planet. We all breathe the same air. We all cherish our children's future, and we are all mortal. I guess that was somewhat prophetic that he would say that, but this is a brilliant speech, really. I encourage everybody to read this speech by John F. Kennedy. It's available online at a number of places. After the Cuban Missile Crisis was successfully resolved, Nikita Khrushchev said, any man who could stare at the reality of nuclear war without sober thoughts was an irresponsible fool. Okay, now see, we have been, growing up during the Cold War, we had been taught that this guy, Nikita Khrushchev, was the reincarnation of the devil. I mean, there was no person on earth, not anybody in the mafia or anybody else, worse than Nikita Khrushchev at that time during the Cold War. And I'm talking about growing up, in the 1960s. This is something that we were totally aware of all the time. I mean, I wonder if you went in an elementary school now and just asked somebody, who is Vladimir Putin, how many people would he know who he is? How many could find Russia on a map? But we were taught geography was one of our main subjects. And that's one of the things that gave me an interest in global affairs, because when they said something was happening in China, I knew where China was. Okay, so I mean, that's critical subject they don't see any need to teach now, but I don't know. I just think it enhances your critical thinking skills. Let me just put it like that. 2 lines from the Sachs article should be instructive to politicians in Washington. Keep communication channels open. So I just stated above that Austin hadn't talked to his counterpart since March of 2023. I don't know when Blinken has talked to Lavrov. I don't believe Biden has spoken to or communicated with Putin since December of 2021. This is insanity. But, they spending American taxpayer dollars. I mean, it's like, somebody's, is tossing pennies or whatever. Keep the communication channel open, and nuclear powers must avert those confrontations which bring an adversary to a choice of either humiliating retreat or nuclear war. Does anyone in D.C. have the intelligence to do this? Well, I haven't seen anyone so far. Not one. Not in the Biden administration, U.S. Congress. Well, there might be a few, Thomas Massie, maybe a few in the U.S. Congress, maybe Rand Paul. I don't know. We know that all of the Democrats, including all of the members of the Congressional Black Caucus and the so-called squad, all voted to give another $60.8 billion to the Ukraine war a few months ago. We know that for a fact. So any man that could stare the reality of nuclear war without sober thoughts was an irresponsible fool. Well, I would submit that that's what you have running. That's what we have running the United States of America right now.
In the United States of America, we have a vegetable.
Whoever winds him up and sends him out to say things. I mean, what you get is it's like a toy soldier. We used to have these toy soldiers. We wound them up, and they would last for a few seconds. Then you had to wind them up again, and so that's basically what you have here. It's obvious that the irresponsible fool in the White House doesn't understand, or is so determined to save face to try to get himself reelected that he's risking nuclear war. Because how far can you push these people? Now, I know some people will come on and say, well, the Russians have killed civilians. They bombed apartment buildings in Ukraine. They've done that. Yes, that has happened. That's a fact. But the United States killed 50,000 people. Well, I think it was maybe the United Kingdom. bombed in the bombing of Dresden during World War II. But they also, the people who would criticize Russia and remember Vladimir Putin has been indicted by the International Criminal Court, right? They don't mention the fact that the neo-Nazis and the others in the Ukrainian army have been bombing the Donbass area, killing civilians since 2014, not since 2022. So I would like to see the totals as in terms of civilian deaths. But this is fundamentally a war between two armies. Actually, it's between the Russian military and the Ukraine military, which would have been defeated within a matter of months. And I'm not saying that they aren't brave soldiers, because they have fought bravely without NATO and the United States providing real-time intelligence using, what is it, Elon Musk, the Starlink. This is where a Russian battalion is. This is where a Russian general is, and several Soviet commanders have been killed. This is war. Now, we also have to say that the number of women and children killed by either Russia or Ukraine pales in comparison to the slaughter that's taking place in Gaza. But that's another issue. But the purpose here was we just wanted to go on record as saying, okay, American people, you need to wake up, before we get vaporized. Asante Sana.
For brothers and sisters, leave your comments down in the comment section. Subscribe, give this video a thumbs up, and stay tapped into African Liberation Media. Until next time, Habibi for Hodier.
Habibi for Hodier.